My ex-husband filed for divorce on my birthday. The boat was registered to me as a 10th birthday present. He forgot. So did the lawyer. I agreed to a quick, no-fault divorce. A week later, I sold his beloved yacht for $4. $2 million. All the money went to a charity. It wasn't the birthday I had imagined. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of building a life together. And this was how it ended. A simple email. I woke up to the usual sunshine spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Los Angeles home. A city that always seemed to be filled with too much noise and too many people. Yet here, in the vast emptiness of the sprawling house, it felt eerily quiet. I had expected him to wake me up with a kiss, with flowers, maybe a breakfast on the terrace, just like he always did. He was always the romantic, always showing up with some over-the-top gesture. But not this time. This year was different. Instead, I opened my eyes to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A notification. A new email. His name flashed across the screen. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I rubbed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reached for it. He never emailed me. He wasn't the emailing type. Always too busy with meetings, calls, and business trips. But it was his name. And it was my birthday, so I opened it, expecting some kind of message. But there was nothing romantic, nothing celebratory, just a cold, detached business letter. I think it's time to end this. No salutation, no explanation, just a simple statement followed by the divorce papers attached. He had forwarded them without so much as a warning. A signature was all he needed. My breath caught for a second. A strange chill running through me. How could someone I'd shared so much with, so many intimate moments, so much time, so many sacrifices, end it all like this? Like a transaction. But then again, I knew him. I knew his lack of emotion, his obsession with control. It was what he'd been doing to me for years, not in the traditional sense. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't overtly disrespectful, but in the small things. In the way he pulled away when things got too close. In the way he never really opened up. It was a slow erosion. Over time. The business trips that lasted too long. The phone calls that were always just a little too secretive. The strange silence at dinner. And now this. I didn't let myself react. I didn't let myself be the woman who would fall apart. The woman who would cry and beg him to stay. That wasn't who I was. No. I was the woman who had been preparing for this moment for years. I stared at the email for a long time, calculating my next move. He had played his hand, so now it was my turn. He thought he had control. He thought he had the power in this. He didn't. Not anymore. I signed the papers without hesitation. The cold, calculating part of me that had learned to protect myself in a world that constantly demanded perfection took over. I knew the divorce would be clean, quick. It would all look so neat from the outside. The lawyer would say I was doing the right thing. No drama, no scandal. No one would question it. The papers would be filed. I would go on with my life. Everyone would think it was fine. But there was something he didn't account for. Something he forgot. The yacht. It was the one he had given me for our 10th wedding anniversary. He thought he had outdone himself. He thought he was being clever, giving me the biggest, most extravagant toy money could buy. A sleek, luxurious yacht that had all the amenities you could imagine, an infinity pool, a jacuzzi, a personal chef's kitchen, the kind of thing you flaunted at the docks, the kind of thing that made you feel untouchable. But what he didn't know was that the yacht was registered in my name. I had insisted on it when we first bought it. I wanted to make sure it was mine. It seemed silly at the time. Who would think to secure a yacht in their name when they were married to a man who had everything? But I had my reasons. And now, as I stared at the divorce papers, I realized that this one small detail would be the key to my revenge. I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I wasn't going to let him think he could take everything. No, I had something he couldn't touch, and it would cost him more than he ever imagined. I set the papers down on the table, my mind racing, heart beating slowly but surely with a sense of purpose. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt a sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do next. It was time to make him regret this, to make him feel the weight of the life he thought he was leaving behind. I just needed time to plan. In the days that followed, I moved with a calculated calm. I knew how this would look to the outside world. I was the woman who had been blindsided by her husband's cold departure. I was the victim of a marriage that had died without warning. People would feel sorry for me. They would see me as a woman who was too dignified to fight, too graceful to make a scene. But in reality, I was taking my time. I was watching him in the way he handled himself now that I was no longer a part of his life. He thought it was over for me, but I knew better. He had made one fatal mistake. He had forgotten about the yacht. A week passed in silence. It was strange, how easily people accepted the narrative. No one questioned the way it all went down, his sudden email, the quick signing of papers, and my stoic, almost detached reaction. Everyone thought I was handling it with a level of grace that most women could only dream of. The perfect victim, the woman who didn't make a scene, who didn't demand answers, who didn't chase after her ex-husband in the hopes of salvaging anything. They didn't know what I was planning. My days were filled with a quiet, methodical routine. I kept up appearances. Of course, the world had to believe that I was moving on, that I was taking this all in stride. I attended charity luncheons, where I smiled and nodded at all the right moments, listened to all the banal conversations about real estate and vacations, and offered up the occasional small talk with other women who were in my social circle. But the truth was, my mind was elsewhere. My lawyer had been diligent, asking if I wanted to fight for anything in the divorce. We'd gone over the terms in detail. It was a no-fault divorce. The property, the investments, the business, everything was split cleanly. I had secured my share of the family assets, but it wasn't about money for me. It was about power, about control. And the yacht, it had been his biggest mistake. I'd given him the space to think he was free of me, free to go about his life, free to enjoy whatever he was getting up to with his new friend, the one I suspected had been the cause of this. He was far too careful to let anything slip in his text messages or phone calls, but I had my sources. When you're married to a businessman, you learn how to find things out without asking directly. I knew everything. About her, about the hotel rooms, about the trips he'd taken that had nothing to do with business. She had been an easy target for him, the kind of woman who loved the idea of being with a powerful man but didn't understand that power came with its own set of consequences. She'd never known the real him, the man I had spent a decade unraveling. I knew she didn't even know about the yacht. She probably didn't even care. But I cared, and I wasn't going to let him get away with thinking he could leave me behind with nothing. He thought he was going to walk away from our marriage with a clean slate, but I would make sure he remembered me. He would never forget that I was the one who had the last word. So, a week after the divorce was finalized, I made my first move. Monaco. I'd been there before, of course, not just for pleasure, but for the social gatherings that happened among the elite, the high-profile auctions, the parties in the yachts, the events that were so exclusive that you couldn't get in unless you knew the right people, and I had those connections. I didn't waste time. I knew who to call, who to trust to handle something like this. A yacht like mine was a rare thing. The auction house I had chosen was known for dealing with the world's most prestigious assets, for turning rare, high-end items into international spectacle. They didn't ask questions. They knew the game. The yacht would be sold, the money would go to a good cause, and no one would be the wiser. I didn't need to keep it. The yacht had become a symbol of the life I was leaving behind, the life that had been built on his terms. The yacht was part of his legacy, a luxury, a trophy, but I didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. The yacht would be my statement. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my lawyer, not my closest friends. They would never understand. They would think I was doing it out of spite, and maybe I was, but it wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about showing him the consequences of his choices. It was about restoring the balance of power. The day of the auction came faster than I expected. The yacht had been listed internationally, and the buzz surrounding it was electric. The world's elite were all watching, all waiting. The day was perfect, the Mediterranean sun was bright, the air thick with anticipation, and there it was, my yacht, sitting in the harbor, looking even more magnificent than it had when I first saw it. The sleek lines, the soft gleam of the polished hull, the massive glass windows overlooking the sea. I was there, of course. I always had to be there, to be seen, to ensure that everything went exactly the way I wanted it. I watched as the first bid came in, and then another. It was all happening so fast. The numbers were climbing higher than I had expected. 4 million, 5 million, 6. The bids came in like clockwork, one after the other. The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic beat in the background, and I let it wash over me. It was surreal, watching someone else pay for something that had once been a symbol of my marriage. But there was no sadness, no anger, just a sense of finality. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was the statement. By the time the hammer came down, the final price had reached $4, 2 million. The room erupted in applause, the highest bidder standing proudly, their excitement palpable, but I didn't care about that. I had made my move, and now, it was time to finish what I started. The next step was simple. I set up a fund, a divorce fund, for women going through the same thing I had, women who had been betrayed, women who had been left behind with nothing. I made sure it was a public fund, with the full weight of the auction's proceeds behind it. And I did one last thing. I named it after him. His last name, Divorce Fund, a small touch of irony. I watched as the news spread. It wasn't immediate. At first, people didn't understand, but once the donations started coming in, once the public started to notice, the story took on a life of its own. They couldn't ignore it. The man who thought he had it all, who thought he could walk away from me without consequence, was now being publicly associated with a charity designed to help women like me. It was perfect. The weeks that followed were a quiet kind of chaos. I kept a low profile, as I had planned. I didn't need to be at the center of the media frenzy that surrounded the auction, but the headlines wrote themselves, didn't they? They always do. Ex-wife turns divorce into victory, $4, 2 million yacht auctioned, fund for women launched. I hadn't expected the media to pick up on it so quickly, but they did, and the stories spread like wildfire. The yacht, the one he'd given me on our 10th anniversary, became a symbol of vengeance, of control, of turning the tables on a man who had thought he could just walk away. And then there was the fund. His last name, Divorce Fund. It caught the public's attention for reasons beyond just its title. It was personal. It wasn't some generic charity name that could be easily forgotten. It was his name. It had weight. The fact that I had named it after him was a statement that no one could ignore. At first, I didn't hear from him directly, not that I was expecting him to come crawling back. His pride was too thick for that, but I could feel the shift. His calls stopped coming. There were no more awkward emails or messages pretending to care. He had retreated into his world of business meetings, overseas trips, and whatever else he thought would keep him occupied. The quiet buzz around the auction became his reality. He couldn't avoid the attention anymore. The news had spread far beyond Monaco. Major outlets had picked it up. Even his business associates, who had always been in the background, who had always turned a blind eye to his personal life, began talking. They were uncomfortable. I could tell. Uncomfortable with how neatly I had tied the strings of this game together. I hadn't just taken his yacht, I had taken control, and it made him look weak. I had no illusions. This wasn't a win for me in the traditional sense. It wasn't about getting back at him because I thought he had wronged me. It was about showing him the consequences of his arrogance. He thought he could play the field, hide behind his wealth and his power, and I had reminded him that the real power, the kind that lasts, was in the choices we made. He had forgotten that. I hadn't. but just because he wasn't calling me didn't mean he wasn't paying attention. I got the first letter a week later. It came in the most formal of envelopes, the kind that told you the message inside was serious. The letterhead was all business, his law firm's logo embossed at the top. I could already guess what it was before I opened it, but I did anyway. It was a cease and desist. He wasn't pleased about the fund. It seemed he hadn't considered that part when I had planned the whole thing. It was one thing to auction off the yacht, but it was another thing entirely to take his name and tie it to something so, well, unflattering. He was angry, that much was clear, but the letter itself was cold, calculating. It demanded that I retract the fund, that I remove his name from it, and that I transfer the funds back. I smiled as I read it, feeling that strange, quiet satisfaction that only comes from knowing you've made someone sweat. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went about my days. I had my meetings. I kept up appearances. The women I socialized with were fascinated by my composure through it all, by how I had handled the public divorce. I didn't let on about the letter. I didn't let anyone see the calm veneer I had built crack. No one needed to know. A few days later, I responded through my lawyer. His words were sharp, but mine were sharper. I reminded him of one very important detail: the yacht was legally mine. It had been a gift, sure, but it was my name on the registration, not his, and while he could try to make me look like the villain in his own narrative, the public would see through it. They always did. I wasn't just playing for revenge. I was playing for control. I knew I had him now. I could feel it in the air, the way his legal team had begun scrambling for damage control. They were trying to make me seem like the irrational ex-wife, the bitter woman scorned, but they couldn't, not when I had played my cards so carefully. And then came the second letter. This one wasn't as cold. It was more desperate, a little more pleading. He wanted to meet, to discuss things in person. He claimed the fund was misguided and that I had misunderstood his intentions with the divorce. The entire letter felt hollow, like a man who realized he had underestimated the woman he thought he could control. He was afraid. I didn't need to meet him, not in person. There was nothing left to discuss. The deal was done. I'd made sure of that. But I did send a message through my lawyer. It was short, direct. The fund stays, and no, I won't be giving back the money. You made your choices. This is mine. In the days following, there was a shift in how people viewed the entire situation. Those who had once whispered about my marriage, about the supposed perfect life I had with a powerful man, now saw me as something else. They saw me as someone who had regained control, who had played the game better than him. It wasn't about the yacht. It wasn't about the money. It was about taking what was mine, and it was about making sure he understood that I could still make waves, even without him. And that was just the beginning. Weeks had passed since the auction, and the world seemed to be moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, a taste of success I hadn't realized I needed until I had it. Every morning, I sipped my coffee, gazing out at the skyline from my penthouse in Los Angeles, feeling the pulse of the city beneath me. It wasn't about the yachts or the houses. It was about the power of having nothing, and still managing to own everything. The press had quieted down, but my name remained in the conversation. Every few days, someone would reach out. Business magazines, lifestyle bloggers, even influencers, asking for my thoughts on the bold move I had made, on how to reclaim one's life after betrayal. I played along, of course, well-mannered, never overly eager to spill the full details of my plan. I allowed the mystery to swirl around me. Let them speculate. Let them be curious about the woman who had somehow turned the tables. The divorce was final, but I wasn't finished yet. One thing had become clear in the weeks since: he was unraveling. I had expected him to strike back. I'd prepared for it, in fact, but what I hadn't anticipated was the depth of his ignorance. The way he clung to the narrative that he had somehow won by filing for the divorce in the first place. He truly believed that by sending me the papers on my birthday, He was doing something. What? Exactly? Showing power? Reclaiming control? That was where he had miscalculated. Because if there was one thing I had always known about him, it was that he underestimated me, and underestimating me had always been his biggest mistake. I had known about his affair for over a year, maybe longer. It wasn't difficult to figure out. The whispers, the missed calls, the secret meetings. He wasn't as careful as he thought, and while I hadn't confronted him directly, I didn't need to. What I needed was leverage, and now, I had it. I'd hired a private investigator the moment the divorce papers landed in my inbox. At first, it had been just a precaution, but as I sat in my office, reviewing the thick file of photographs, text exchanges, and hotel receipts, I realized something. This wasn't just about the affair, it was about his arrogance, his belief that he could hide things in plain sight, his belief that I would just sit back and accept it. But I didn't. There was one last move I had to make, and I was prepared to execute it with the same precision I had used with everything else. I arranged for the final meeting. It wasn't in a flashy restaurant or a luxurious suite like most people would have expected. No, I wasn't giving him that kind of satisfaction. It was in a quiet, private room at a cafe near his office in Miami, just the two of us, no one else. I arrived first. Of course, I made sure to sit at the back, away from the windows, so he wouldn't see me as he walked in. When he did, he looked as though he had aged a decade in the short time since we last spoke. The arrogance was still there, but it was faint, like smoke in a fading wind. He wore that customary confident mask, but there was a nervousness in his step. His eyes darted around, looking for something, maybe a way out, a way to regain control. I watched him sit down. His jaw was clenched tight, the same way it had been when he handed me the divorce papers, so coldly. But now, there was something else in his posture, defeat, barely hidden. "I didn't expect you to agree to this," he said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge of frustration in his voice. "I'm not here to discuss the yacht," I replied, letting the silence stretch just a moment too long before adding, "You're here to explain yourself." His eyes hardened. "I don't owe you an explanation." I smiled. "Oh, I think you do. You see, there's something I've been sitting on, something that, I think, you should know about." He frowned, clearly not expecting this. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I slid a manila envelope across the table. His eyes narrowed as he looked at it. I didn't let him open it. "Not yet." "Your little affair," I said, watching his face fall. "The one you thought I didn't know about. The one that's been going on for over a year. It's all documented, every detail. The hotels, the flights, the texts. I've kept everything. I'm sure you remember the last time we spoke, when I told you I had planned everything carefully. This is part of that plan." For a moment, he didn't speak. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to process it, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. He was a man used to controlling the narrative, but now, he was scrambling. "I'm not sure what you think you're going to do with this," he finally said, his voice rough, "but it won't change anything." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "No, it won't. But what it will do is ensure that you can never use your charm to manipulate anyone again. Not after this gets out." His face drained of color. He wasn't worried about me. Not really. No, it wasn't the affair he was concerned about. It was the damage this could cause to his reputation, to his carefully constructed image of success, of control. "And don't think for one second that I won't make sure this gets into the right hands," I added, letting my words sink in, "because I will. You were careless, and now you're going to pay for it." His lips tightened. "You're playing a dangerous game." I smiled, feeling that same calm confidence I had felt in the days before the auction. "I'm not playing a game. I'm just finishing what I started." As he left the cafe, his back straight, his pride still intact in the way he carried himself, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was it, the final blow. He would never be the same again, and neither would I. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do about it.